it always happens the same way. I'm walking around out in nature, and all of a sudden, the overwhelming character design urge takes over. Like last time it was, what if the sky was a person? And this time I did something which is very dangerous for me. I looked at a tree.
Wow.
And ever since those light rays bounced off the trunk of that tree and into my peepers, I have had the overwhelming urge to turn trees into beautiful men.
It's trees then.
But not just any beautiful men. Knights in armor with swords. Now I know what you're thinking. Kira, you never draw men and you will surely fail. Now listen, it's not that I can't draw men, it's that I choose not to draw men.
Oh my god, what is that?
Unless, of course, the men are beautiful and robust with long flowing manes and a big sword. So I have been ravaging Pinterest for the past couple of days, and here are my inspo boards. So much like the previous video, I'm going to be doing 3 different character designs today. One based on an oak tree, one based on a birch tree, and a knight based on a willow tree. Also, is it getting hot in here, or is it just all the beautiful men? I'm really excited because all the trees look wildly different, and I think they have a lot of potential to inspire some unique shape language and color palettes, kind of like how the skies did last time. But with trees, we're playing with lots of earth tones and interesting textures. I feel like I'm gonna really be able to take that and use it to inspire a lot of the armor design, especially if I use a lot of these abstract armor designs as inspiration. Looking at this, I am super excited to start designing. I am ready to receive some nutrition. Before we do that, real quick, hello there. Sponsorship Kira here. And I'd like to thank domain name registrar Porkbun and their top level domain name .design for sponsoring this video. Whether you're just starting out as a designer or you're looking for a way to improve your online presence, to get clients as a designer, you have to have a portfolio website to showcase your work. .design is a more elegant URL option. For example, your URL could go from annygoldsmithdesign.com to annygoldsmith.design. It has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? .design is the premier domain extension for professional and aspiring designers. From web and UX design to interior design to other design disciplines. It is already being used by many of the world's leading brands, design departments, and design studios, making it the go-to domain of choice for the global design community. Major brands like Spotify, Slack, Airbnb, Adobe, and Amazon are already using .design. Get on board and get your name before it's gone. Your domain name is the first thing that every client sees. Using a .design domain name will help you to achieve a unique identity. That is something that no other domain name can do. .design reflects what you do as a designer. It improves your branding, and you can get your domain name just by clicking my link in the description. I encourage you guys to check it out. It can really help to polish your online presence as a designer, and when you guys do check out the sponsors, it really helps me out. So thank you so much to everyone who has done so. Now, let's get designing. So as per the usual, my first step of designing groups is to sketch some of the rough shapes of the characters together, and since I didn't mention it at the top of the video, once again I'm designing a team, so I want there to be some cohesion between the styles of armor and the colors I choose, and you know, just to add another layer of difficulty for myself, because there definitely isn't enough of that in this video. But designing characters like this together just kind of helps you to envision them more as a team. It helps you to coordinate their shapes and get a feel for their chemistry, you know? Ensembles need to look good together, which is something that I forget about a lot. I'm trying to challenge myself to draw more diverse body types, and I'm kind of using these design videos as an opportunity to practice a bunch of different art principles at once, hence the reason why I've been making more full illustrations for my character designs. But I am going to be doing some simpler standing sketches of each character before I work more on the illustrative poses so that I can nail down their build, silhouette, and some of the key design elements. So once I finish the rough sketches of the ensemble, I go on to working on the individuals. And as I begin working on the first design, our oak tree boy, I'm focusing a lot on his build and his proportions to try to give him a unique silhouette. Silhouette is so much of what makes a design readable, and since oak trees are these massive, girthy trees, I wanted to give this character a large, strong upper body. And to go along with his large upper body, I wanted to give him a hulking cloak and some large armor to really emphasize his arms and torso. I feel like it really lends itself to the idea of a mighty oak tree with towering towering branches. So to suggest that imagery even more, I also added some actual branches ornamenting the back of his shoulder armor and cloak. It's maybe a bit on the nose, but I really like character designs like Radagast from The Hobbit or Groot that utilize more organic tree-ish things in the silhouette, so I rolled with it. And another huge source of inspiration for this character and his shoulder armor was Stoic from How to Train Your Dragon. I really like how the bulk of his furs give him a very square silhouette, and I wanted to do something similar, so bam, actual branches. Getting to the design of the actual armor, I was very inspired by these leather armor designs that I found on Pinterest, so these designs served as the main foundation. I wanted them to look like large panels of bark that he almost ripped off an actual oak tree and strapped to himself, but with some obvious traditional armor design thrown in. There are more organic looking areas of armor around his neck and shoulder area, but as they flow down his arms, they become a bit more articulated. For his breastplate, I broke away a bit from the bark-inspired armor and opted for a more traditional armor breastplate. I wanted him to still read very much as knight or warrior, so I think the inclusion of a smoother, sleeker breastplate generally brought everything together in a nice way. And while I wanted to design helmets to go with each of these characters, especially since the helmet is arguably the most important piece of armor, I kinda suck at drawing them and designing them, so I think that's something I'll leave for a later date, especially since I had so much fun drawing the faces of these characters. These are definitely going to become OCs because I love them, so they'll get helmets later on. Just not now. To wrap up the inspiration sources for the armor, I wanted his sword to be big and very fantasy inspired. I designed a rose-themed blade for my character Rose Thornblade a few years ago, and I absolutely love it, so I used a lot of the same design elements here. I based the shape of the hilt, handle, and pommel on literal oak trees and added some spindly, flowy ornamentation to spice it up. This is not the most functional sword design. The wider part of the tree coming into the blade kind of makes the hilt a bit less effective, but I do imagine that he could grab the tree part of the blade, since it isn't sharp, if he needed to, and bonk someone over the head with the handle, which is an actual legitimate swordplay tactic. So while it's not perfect, some of it could serve some function. I like the design overall. It's got some flaws, but it looks pretty visually nice, but I do admit it kind of reminds me of cartoon lettuce. I could have maybe done a bit of a better job there. I am starting to study swords and swordplay a bit more in my free time, which should hopefully help me to come up with more functional designs in the future, just to try to expand my visual library and my knowledge a little bit. So maybe next time it'll be better. I hope. As for the shield, it's mostly just a pretty strap on your arm kind of shield. I admit I don't think I made it big enough for him. I think with his proportions he would benefit from a bigger shield since he could handle the weight. I mean, this design is definitely far from perfect, but I think I am finding a lot of good notes for future designs at least. Finally, under all the armor, I just gave him some basic chainmail. I actually found a really nifty hack for drawing a chainmail while working on these. Clip Studio has a gold chain brush, and if you select the area you want to put the chainmail in and use that brush along the contours of your character, it looks pretty convincing. Now you could just use a chainmail texture, but the issue with that is that it doesn't exactly form to your character's contours. You could morph it, but then that distorts the image data. It looks kind of weird. I like this better. Anyways, from there you can just use an adjustment layer to tweak the colors of the brush. And now we're finally getting into the thick of the illustration bit, so let's talk a bit about that. In terms of the posing, I wanted to give this guy a pose that evoked classic knight, so I went with a pose down on one knee with his blade in the ground. I think it helps to show off his entire design pretty well and show a bit of his characterization as a grounded, tanky boy. The colors were definitely a challenge for this one. They were actually a challenge for all of them. It took me a while to find the right combination of warm browns and greens to make the various colors in this design work. But once I got the colors working together, I was really on a roll and I was actually able to finish this design pretty quickly. The big breakthrough, I think, was making his breastplate that hunter green color. I think once I had that down, I was able to balance all the brown tones around that a lot easier. Of course, because I couldn't help myself, I gave him reddish brown hair, but I did add a few hints of gray to allude to different gray colors in bark, and maybe he's a bit of an older character. And even though the silver gold combo is usually a no-no, I gave a lot of the metal accents a gold tone and his chainmail a silver tone. I think it's a little chaotic, but visually it still works. I like it. And from there, I'm mostly just working on the background. And listen, I know I've gone on about this character for too long, but we're almost done. But now I want to talk about some random character details. So since these guys are knights, I wanted to give them strong looking bodies, but in a variety of ways, to give them each more of a physical specialty, specifically in regards to how they might fight. Our oak boy has the physique of someone who really bulks, think Olympic weightlifters, giving his skill set an emphasis on that tank archetype, which is basically how I think he would fight. Well, not the most original fighting style, he's strong enough to bear the weight of his giant sword and execute powerful swings and thrusts. And like I said earlier, I think he would also use his sword as a blunt force weapon from time to time and grab it by the blade to strike with the handle. And I think he would also use his shield in a similar way, just to kind of smack someone in the face. And maybe the shield also has the option to grab it by the fist as well, almost like a giant buckler. It doesn't really have the hand slot, but just pretend it does. That's about as flushed out as I had time for at the moment. This was very rushed, but I'll definitely be revisiting these characters in the future to give them a bit more love because I actually really like them. But anyways, now it's time for our second character design, and that is our Birch Knight. Right off the bat, I had a clear vision for what I wanted to do with this character. And it was Thranduil, and all I could think of was Thranduil, and since he's already a character, that meant I basically didn't have a clear vision, so I struggled with this one. Ha, I gotcha. You thought I planned well? I don't do that. Either way, I tried to come up with something semi-original. Since birch trees are very slender and spindly, I did know that I wanted his frame to be pretty small and slim, and much like the Wood Elves of Mirkwood, I wanted to give him a graceful, elegant sort of look, so I went with a more toned, lanky body type to once again allude to the silhouette of birch trees, and since the bark of a birch is relatively smooth, I went for more of a curved, smooth armor aesthetic. I based a lot of the shape of the armor off of birch leaves, and admittedly, also off of a lot of designs of elf armor from Lord of the Rings, because I can't help myself. I wanted to have large, leafy looking pauldrons with that rich red color associated with birch trees in autumn, and from there a lot of the armor design was based off birch tree leaves flowing into each other, with the exception of a few panels, which I designed to look more like birch tree bark. I had originally designed a lot more armor that looked like tree bark, but it just wasn't matching the aesthetic of the leafy bits very well, so I opted for a more subtle design, and birch trees don't really have much bark, so makes sense. His sword and shield are a bit of a weird case and basically mostly there to look fancy. Whenever I was designing his sword, I wanted the long, skinny aesthetic of a birch tree, so I decided on this long spear type sword, which is kind of like a katana with a long handle. It's definitely not the most effective weapon and still exists mostly to look cool, which is all it really needs to do, but I really wish I had gone with long knives for him, or maybe even a double-bladed sword that splits into twin knives in the center, just to be at least a little bit more practical. So let's pretend that that's actually how this spear thing works. Once again, he's got a smaller shield. I tried to make the design look like twisting branches with a tree in the middle. I think it looks alright, maybe a little flashy, but not too bad. Not really a detail about his armor, but I also gave him a little branch crown on his head, which of course screams Thranduil, but I think it looks pretty nice. To complete the clothing part of his design, I gave him a long tunic type thing that goes under his armor. He doesn't have a whole lot of armor protecting his gut or groin for movement reasons, so he also gets a layer of chainmail under everything just for some added protection. Maybe he has some metal plate underneath the tunic too. I don't know. Alright then. Keep your clothing secrets. So now to get into the more illustration-based bits, I inked these in my usual inking style with my transparent watercolor and dense watercolor brushes. They just give me a nice bit of flow and freedom to do some more organic shapes. And to get on to the color on this one, oh boy, was this a struggle. I said I had a firm grasp going into this, but my head was totally lying to me. The color combos were just not working. Right off the bat, I wanted him to have reddish brown hair and white armor to really sell that birch tree aesthetic, and I based his skin tone off of the indigenous models that I use as his face reference, and this gave some nice contrast, but from there, balancing colors was kind of a nightmare. I knew the third color I wanted to use in the scheme was sort of a turquoise teal blue because it complemented the reds pretty nicely, and yeah, it looked pretty decent, but finding the next color was tricky. I really tried and failed to add several different toned reds, oranges, and yellows to the bits on the armor that was supposed to evoke leaves, and it just wasn't working. I tried at various points to add greens, warm grays, and finally yellows, but the ratios I was using them in just weren't working for me, and I did a lot of hue shifting on some of the colors in the design to try out different ideas, but none of them stuck with me the way that initial color scheme did, so I tried to keep tweaking my original scheme, and after getting some feedback from my mom and my friend, I was able to balance some of the reds and teals by adding some more yellow tones. And unfortunately, the white armor was also throwing me off. So once again, I completely betrayed that silver and gold don't go together thing, and I added some yellow to the armor too. Look, it's white and yellow, so it's different, right? Anyways, I eventually determined that there needed to be less red on the armor and some gold trim on the tunic, which helped to pull the design together a lot. A lot of my coloring method is just throwing a bunch of color ideas at a design and seeing what sticks, and this is definitely a prime example of that. I also partially based my color scheme on this photo, so that helped me to narrow things down quite a bit. To finish up the illustrative bits, I once again added a quick background with some very elaborate rocks and trees, and began adding some simple shading to finish up the piece. And I know I didn't go much into detail about the illustration process, but I have an entire video on my full digital art process that you can go watch, and I've been getting a lot of requests to do a background tutorial for a while now, so that'll be in the doc for early 2020 as well, so keep a lookout. As for a few character bits and where he fits in the team, given his more agile frame, I'd say he's a character that relies on speed in his fighting style. He probably goes for quick slashes rather than thrusts, and opts for evasion to counter enemies when he can, since his physical strength can't really rival a larger opponent. His style also probably employs using an enemy's momentum against them and throwing them off balance. He's probably the assassin, ninja, stealth class of the team. Again, I would love to flesh him out a bit more in a future video whenever I have time. Okay, I know I rambled on about the previous two designs for way too long, but now it's time for our third and final design, the Willow. I basically knew the direction I wanted to go in for this character as soon as I remembered I had this glorious image sitting in one of my Pinterest folders. One of my favorite things to do in character design is to take things that have similar visual languages and link them in a design. And this man's beautiful hair was giving me big willow tree energy, so I rolled with it. For the final design, I wanted to go for more of a traditional superhero-esque body type, partially because I thought it would fit well, and partially because they're fun to draw and I wanted practice. But I also wanted there to be somewhat of an intentional visual language whenever it came to the muscles. I wanted his shape language to be kind of round and square. Basically anything with an angled edge should be a little bit rounded off, so I just used that principle to design his proportions as well. I wanted to give him that very trim but bulky musculature that you see in sports like boxing and MMA, and this boy is a Dorito. Not that willow trees are per se, but I think the glorious mane of hair I gave him helped to nod to the willow influence in his silhouette, and I think the tree influence really started to come through with the armor design. And because I wanted some design consistency between him and the other characters, I once again gave him some big pauldrons, and I designed his pauldrons to have those curved edges and follow the shape language of his hair. I did something similar with the breastplate, although it is a bit more subtle, and I tried to give the elements of his armor these cascading levels, kind of inspired by how the leaves of a willow tree kind of cascade down the side. I also gave each panel a little willow tree design just to make it a little fancier. It's a very busy, regal looking set of armor, which is something I really like because I'm an absolute maximalist. And I do want to point out a bit of a weakness of mine in designing armor, and that's that I have quite a few defaults whenever it comes to the armor I choose because I have a limited visual library and I only know a few different ways that armor can articulate. So that is something I want to work on in the next couple of months because I have been trying to do some research on different medieval garments and armor to expand my design language. But those improvements will be for another day. I basically designed his sword and shield in a very similar way that I did for Oak. I used that willow design language to make some interesting shapes on the hilt and the handle for the sword and added a design to the blade itself that looked like a willow tree. The sword does have a slightly smaller blade than Oak's though, because I imagine Willow employs some more traditional and strategic sword tactics and relies less on brute force. His shield is also similar to Oak's. Its overall shape is based on a willow tree as well, but it is designed to be a larger shield, more proportionate to his size. I also thought his design was looking a little dull at this point, so I added some wide sleeves and a butt skirt that are supposed to look a bit more willowish, and to add more of a cascading silhouette. When we got to color, things were going pretty smoothly for the most part, but I did run into a few difficulties along the way. Once again, I based his skin tone off the face references I used for him from Pinterest, but I was immediately obsessed with the idea of giving him green hair, which, like, I can't decide if that was a good idea or not. On one hand, it looks pretty sick and plays into the whole willow tree thing, but on the other hand, it made his colors overwhelmingly earth-toned and green, which isn't a color scheme I'm super great at working with. But before I tweaked them later on, I basically started with his hair as hunter green, with his long-sleeved tunic as a dark green, and his armor various shades of gold. This design was looking pretty flat in the beginning, especially compared to some of the other designs, so I kept tweaking as I went. I basically added some saturation saturation to various areas of the armor and some brightness to the lining of the tunic. I also added the mail, of course, and gave it some purple undertones to complement the greens. And at some point, I really started messing with the hair, which I think was kind of a mistake. I definitely prefer the darker color from earlier in the recording, but I guess past me has different ideas. So whenever I was working on this one, it was late at night and I was going insane. Literally at one point, I was like, oh my god, why does the willow tree stuff look like broccoli? But anyways, since I wasn't really happy with the colors yet, I tried purple hair and purple elements of his design, and it just looked pretty awful, but that's the level of experimentation I go to sometimes, and that is also just how unhinged I get whenever I am drawing at 3 a.m. Sometimes you have to know what definitely doesn't work to get closer to what will work, and that's what happened here, because I discovered that I hated the purple, but I did like the more jewel tones in this design, so I shifted the hue of his hair to be more of a jewel tone teal, and bam! I gave him Deku hair. From there, I mostly tweaked the background and the colors to incorporate more teal toned greens to match his hair, and I was liking this version of the design a lot better. I associate willow trees more with that color scheme, and I blame Pocahontas. I warmed up a lot of the duller browns and began adding more shading and detailing to the background, and since willow trees are associated with water, I added some waterfalls and lily pads to the background to be a bit more on theme. And from there, I'm just adding finishing touches, but let's talk about his fight style and some character details. Like I said, he employs more of a defensive, strategic fight style compared to Oak, but he still has a tremendous amount of physical strength to execute an offensive strike when he sees an opening. He's basically the paladin and strategist of the group, very skilled in combat against other skilled opponents. If Oak is the tank and Birch is the ninja, Willow is the strategist mind that coordinates their strengths when they fight groups of opponents or run into trouble while adventuring. He is the strong, noble glue that keeps this ragtag group of trees organized. And with that, here's the finished designs. Okay, so from a design perspective, these characters have some obvious flaws, at least to me. I feel like I could have designed them to look a bit more on theme for their respective tree. Their weapons and armor could be like a bit more functional, and they need helmets. But as some fun illustrative designs that I didn't have much time for to practice a bunch of stuff, I had a blast working on them. And even though they aren't perfect, I really love how they came out, and they'll definitely be OCs and not just one-time designs. So let me know what you think of how they came out. I want to develop personalities and maybe legitimate fight styles for them, so if you have ideas for these boys, leave them in the comments. And like last time, leave name suggestions for them too. I'll be selecting my favorites in the next character design video I make. And on that note, the names I decided to go for the Sky Magical Girls are Celeste for the Day Girl, Lilith for the Night Girl, and Aurora for the Sunset Girl. A lot of these were repeats. There was a general consensus almost that these should be the names, but the first two were submitted by Sarah, and the last one was submitted by, I hope I'm saying your name right, Luisa. So thank you guys so much to everyone who commented. I think the names are quite fitting, so let me know what you think our tree knight should be named. Well, I hope that everyone enjoyed the chaos that was this video. Thanks to everyone who stuck around to the end. I hope you enjoyed watching me draw men for a change. I know. Very rare occurrence at this point. Hi, hello. So I'm also going to have like prints and hoodies and stickers and stuff like that available in my shop. So if you want some, link in the description. Thanks again to Registrar Pork Bun and their top level domain name, .design, for sponsoring this video. They're awesome. Their sponsorship helps me to make content for you guys. So if you need a design domain name, remember to check them out. Remember to submit your names for the boys to get featured in the next character design video. And please also leave any suggestions for future character design videos in the comments. This is indeed turning into a series, and I am loving the suggestions I'm getting so far. I'm very excited to work on some of them. I feel like we might be creating our own little universe of characters for the channel, so I might in the future develop some lore. I feel like that would be super fun, so if you want to stick around for more episodes, be sure to subscribe, turn on notifications, do the YouTube things. It really helps me out, and I super appreciate it when you do. This is not a threat, I swear. But that's all for this week. I'll see you lads next time. Now, if you'll excuse me, I may or may not have to go 3D model a sword. Future content? What? Bye!